Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I've put together a new series. I'm calling it Our Madison. And I'm looking at the things that have shaped our city and our city's history, particularly through the view of African-American people. So I'm talking to trailblazers, history makers, folks who I consider my elders who were born in Madison, but also young people who are young enough to be my children who are born in Madison, who are giving us their perspective of this city as well. It'll be about 4 episodes that'll come out over the next few weeks. And listen, if you're from Madison, this is going to be a great journey for you. But if you're not from Madison, you're from a city that has had first also. So I want you to listen to both my love for my city, my passion for my city, my desire for my city to be equitable for all. So when I push on an issue, if I care enough to push on an issue, it's typically because I'm passionate about it. So I want you to listen to it and learn about my city, learn what black elders and black youngsters and young adults are saying about life in Madison. It's a beautiful place, great campus. It's the seat of state, county, and city government. But yet there's some invisible things that are impacting African Americans that are making us develop diseases, contract diseases, and die more quickly than our white counterparts. And so I just want you to hear through the stories of some great people in our community what has motivated them and what has made them sad. Then I want you to think about your own communities, because these folks live where you live also. Get to know them. Ask them their stories. Help to honor them and their contributions. And also ask them the hard questions. Is this the city you'd want your grandchildren to grow up in? So I just want you to just listen and learn. And I'm just certain that you're going to enjoy these next several episodes. Let me know what you think. I'm really excited about today's episode. I have 3 elders, folks who I've looked up to, who I've known my entire life in this community, and they're all Madison-born African Americans. I have Mr. Billy McDonald, who's here in the studio today. I have Miss Betty Banks, and I have Dr. Richard Harris. Welcome, all 3 of you, to Black Like Me. I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
I'm glad. I'm kind of nervous. I'm honored, definitely, but I'm kind of nervous because, just having these folks in the studio. So listen, you all, there's a Black Like Me tradition where I ask something that's called Black Icebreakers. And so I'm going to throw a couple of questions out. And there's no judgment in this, Miss Betty. She's looking at me like, don't throw me. No judgment. Just some fun questions. All right. When you all were growing up, did either of you dip snuff?
Did we know about dipping snuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we never
plenty.
dipped it.
No, we
Plenty.
Are you sure, Dr. Harris? Because you're a Baptist deacon. You don't dip snuff?
No. My dad told me that. My dad said that would make you sick.
No.
My dad said it would make you sick.
No,
Yeah.
it would.
Yeah.
And my parents said it was unhealthy.
Well, that's what mine said, yeah.
Oh, my
It
goodness.
was around, but we never did.
You never did? Oh, my goodness. Let me see if I can find.
We knew people who did, though.
Yeah. Oh, a lot
Your
of people.
parents would talk about it.
Yes, we did.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, do you did anyone around you use the term tenderheaded growing up? Do you know what tenderheaded is, or did you ever use that, or have relatives who are tenderheaded?
Yes, I knew. I had heard that because they said I was tender-headed.
Really? I thought when you
You
started
know
saying,
about combing hair?
yes. So it just so tenderheaded. So I have my listening audience is mainly white.
Tenderheaded.
So
Yeah.
what's tenderheaded? It means just
It when getting my hair combed, even though I didn't have really tightly curled hair, it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You pull, and I had long braids, and
it would hurt to comb.
Betty Ann's so tender-headed.
I was I know that boy.
I
right
was
there's tender-headed.
nappy-headed. Called nappy-headed, but never
Yeah.
tender-headed.
Yeah.
Oh, this is gonna be a good show. This is gonna be
my
good
hair was
show.
real thick. I had thick braids.
Really, it was also disturbing her eyes when we're pulling on, so comb it, brush it, and she kept telling our mother, "Oh, hurts my eyes, you know. 'Cause
When
it's
she
so,
would pull it?
Yeah, her hair is so thick.
So, Mr. Billy, did you use pomade? What's it called? Pomade?
Not Mr. Billy. Billy.
Well.
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay, Dr. Harris, we're talking about that orange can of pomade.
Yeah, that was pomade. Now, I did know some guys when I was about 13 or 14, they started using what we call concholine.
I heard about that.
And that would process their hair, making it look like Sugar Ray Robinson. And it was also in a kind of a yellow, it had a yellow and orangish bowl or jar. But it was made up of acid and a bunch of other stuff. And in fact, it would take your hair out in about 3 or 4 years. So
That's what
I
I
remember
heard.
that concholine that I used to use was different than this type of pomade or whatever they call that stuff.
Sure.
We got a lot of guys we had an Air Force base, and a lot of the airmen would use that.
Yeah.
To get all right.
Yeah.
This is
People would often say, "Yeah, he's got a conch."
Yes,
that's what they would say.
Yeah.
Okay, when you all were growing up on the South Side, were there ice cream trucks?
We didn't. Billy and I didn't grow up on the South Side. We grew up on East Dayton Street, which actually was the first black neighborhood in Madison because our grandparents, who came here at the turn of the century, they moved to the east. They had two houses moved to the east side. One was a family home, and the other one was a boarding house for other blacks that came to the city. That was in the early 1900s. What, Billy, 1901?
So were there ice cream trucks over there?
Were there what?
Ice cream trucks.
No,
You made your own ice cream, didn't you?
Yes, actually, yes.
That was the best kind. That was the good kind of ice cream.
Yeah, it was.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know what? That's enough. That's enough of those black ice
Okay.
breaker questions. No, that was fun, you all. I love asking people about going down memory lane. Did you have candy stores or corner stores that you all would go to as
Mr.
kids?
Hill's Grocery,
Mr. Hill's.
Hill's grocery store.
which is now
Still
on the
there.
which is now on the Register of Historic Places.
Yes, definitely. So was that the same Hill family?
Yes.
There's a Mrs. Hill.
Yeah, Freddie
Dawn-
Mae Hill, the first
Yes.
African American female to graduate from the university. She's on the mural. There's a mural on East Washington Avenue.
That's her in there.
That's her.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So listen, you all, I have you on the show today because I'm doing this series about life in Madison for African Americans. And so I'm going to be having a number of guests come on, but you all are my special guests because you all were born here and really opened the door and opened way for other African Americans to come. So I just want to ask you a couple of questions about growing up in Madison. And this is great. I'll just say, I grew up with the relatives of these folks who are here on the show. Mr. Billy, he keeps telling me to call him by his first name, but he knows in our black community I'm not about to sit here and call him by his first name. But Mr. Billy was a timer when I was in high school, and he timed my wife's races when she ran for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Harris is a local, he's an author. He's worked for Madison College. He's done a lot of great things here in the community. All of his kids were athletes, hockey, basketball, track, and so we went to competitive schools, and so we know them. And Miss Betty, we go way back. You're a friend and a mentor to my sister. But I knew your mom, but growing up, I didn't realize that I was living among folks who would be known as Madisonian legends, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity. In fact, I think it was your mom who threw a party for 6th graders. Maybe we were graduating from 8th grade. I think it was going into Lincoln in 6th grade. It's now the Latino Health Center on Bell Street. But
St. Martin House. It used to be the St. It was the Blessed Martin House.
St. Martin House.
the St. Martin House.
Yeah.
And that was the second one.
That was the
First
second
one was in the bush.
West
Gotcha.
Washington Avenue.
So it was replaced. So I think it was she that threw a party for 6th graders because Denise Hargrove and I are the same age. We're a year younger than Dana. But I remember going there for my first dance. I think that was for African American kids.
Yeah.
And so your folks were just leaders and folks in the community. But as we're getting as I'm starting to get more into Madison's history, I'm realizing just how significant they are. So let me just back up and just ask a couple of questions. And so you two, Mr. Billy and Miss Betty, are brother and sister.
Yes, we are.
How many siblings did you have growing up here in the Madison area?
There were 4 brothers and 4 boys and 4 girls.
So you and Mr. Billy were born here.
Yeah.
Your parents came here when?
They were. My dad came here when he was 2. My mother was born here.
So Mrs. Mitchell was born in Madison.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so
because
let
our
me think about this.
grandparents, her parents, our mother's parents, came here at the turn of the 20th century, 1901.
Your grandparents did,
Yeah.
1901. Tell me what your grandparents did.
William Miller was a lawyer.
Your grandfather.
Yeah. And Anna Mae, who was our grandmother, she was a teacher. And they came here from Kentucky because they didn't want their children, they didn't have any children yet, but they didn't want their children growing up in Kentucky, and they were looking for a place where, there were more opportunities.
And was Madison just out there as a place? Because Dr. Harris, your mom came here. Did people just put Madison out as this is a great city to live in if you don't want to live in the South and you want better opportunities?
That's what the word was.
That was the word was.
Better than Milwaukee, because Milwaukee was a big city. This is smaller, growing.
Got you. And Dr. Harris, your family came here because your family was on the run, right?
Yeah, her family was chased out of Georgia because her uncle shot some crazy guy, and he shot him at 11 o'clock in the morning, and 1 o'clock in the afternoon they had my mother in a horse and buggy taking her out of Madison. But my uncle, his name was Zach Trotter, he was here, I believe he was here in your mother and father were already here when he got here, because he remembers the Millers and the Hill, because he's families, and Mitchell family. He remembers the Mitchell and Hill family. Mm-hmm. And he settled on West Washington Avenue in about I'd say 8 or 9 or 10. And he got a liquor license. And back in those days, they just said, let's just give this guy a liquor license so he could keep the coloreds out of other places. That's how they call it.
So we had more black
and my
businesses.
My mother
want you to come to the white establishments.
Yeah, and my mother came up and had to stay with him.
Wow.
But when my mother got here, the only families now my mother and father settled in the bush on Milton Street. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the only...
For those of you outside of Madison, that's near Camp Randall.
Yes.
Now. For folks who are outside of Wisconsin.
No, it's over near the...
Brittingham
Park.
That was
closer,
the bush.
Closer to
That
Madison
And
General
it's also
Hospital.
referred to as the Triangle.
That triangle. It's
Sure.
right across from Madison General Hospital.
Sure. Okay, I got you right, Milton. Okay.
And so my mother met her mother.
Met Miss
Mitchell, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And she just thought the world of her mother. And they would talk, and she really helped my mother get used to the city, because she would say, Willie Lou, this is what you should do, and they were both about the same age.
But she would help her to navigate the community.
Yeah.
Now were your mother's like Dr. Harris, your mother was instrumental in helping to start the South Madison Neighborhood Center, which is now known as the Boys and Girls Club. Mm-hmm. But now, did Mrs. Mitchell, your mom, Mr. Billy and Miss Betty, what organization did she upstart? Wasn't she one of the founders of the...
She was the founders of several things as she got
give me a few
older.
examples.
She got, she helped found hospice. She helped found the South Madison Coalition of the Elderly.
Let me tell you what she did, which I hate to cut you off.
No, that's okay. Cut me off.
Because people always forget this. When I was coming up, I used to go to the neighborhood house on West Washington Avenue. Mm-hmm. That was a daycare center that the only black people could go to. Uh-huh. And so when the church moved out, when the Baptist church moved out to Fisher Street, Reverend Dawson was concerned because the bush was being torn down. Mm-hmm. And he was concerned because there was no... And
the bush was an area where a lot of Italian, Jewish, and black... Because, again, our listeners are from all over the world.
And I hate to interrupt Betty, because they always forget the importance of her mother. I remember when Reverend Dawson met with her mother, and they talked about daycare concerns, because black kids could not go to any other daycare center in Madison after that was... Mm-hmm. So her mother and an Italian woman, and I can't think of her name now, but your mother started a daycare center, and she said, Reverend Dawson, because he was complaining about it. She said, "I'm gonna put it right across the street from your church."
Was that Rosie Troya?
Rosie Troya Baker,
Yeah.
Right.
and that's where she put it. And a lot of people don't realize that her mother picked up all of those black kids because they couldn't go to any of the daycare centers
And took them there.
and put them out there. And Reverend Dawson was so happy. And I remember he would say to my mother, "We finally have a place for black children to go to." And everyone forgets that.
That her mother
your mother started it.
Well, I know she was involved in it. I didn't realize that it was her idea.
It was
than
her
that.
idea.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
How about the NAACP? Was your mother helpful with that, or the local Urban League? I
Well,
thought I heard one of
she
those.
was one of the
Yes.
founders. She was
Yes.
one of the founders of the Urban
Urban
League.
League, yeah.
And the NAACP way back in the day was founded by our grandparents.
Yeah.
And
Really?
yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's a. We need to talk
But
about
that's
that
what,
more.
That's what.
And we need to ask more questions about that, Mr. Billy.
My grandmother at one time was fighting for blacks to have a right to vote and women have a right to vote. She was fighting. She was with both groups.
And she
is amazing.
spoke before the state legislature several times.
A black woman did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, could your grandfather, Mr. Miller, right,
Yeah.
could he practice law?
No, and he
In Wisconsin.
met Governor La Follette in Milwaukee. He was working in Milwaukee, and Governor La Follette was so impressed by him. He asked him to come work for him. In back in that day, he couldn't be named as an aide or an advisory person.
Right,
sure.
But that's what he was. But
For Bob La Follette.
it had to be yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Bob Senior.
Bob Senior. Okay.
Yeah.
Where did your grandfather go to law school?
He was at
Berea.
Berea
College.
College.
Berea
And down in
College.
Kentucky.
In Ohio?
In Kentucky.
in Kentucky.
Yeah. Is that right?
Both my grandmother and grandfather went there.
No. Our grandmother went to Knoxville
Oh, she did?
College. Yeah.
Okay. I thought she graduated from Berea.
No, she went to Knoxville.
So what would your mother, Dr. Harris, and your parents, Mr. Billy and Miss Betty, what would they say about current race relations in Madison today, considering all they fought for, what they did, what they dreamed of for their children? If we could just bring them back for an hour visit, and I'd like for each of you just to take, because I've got so many other questions, just to take a brief take on this. Miss Betty, let's start with you. What do you think they'd feel about race relations in Madison? You can be completely honest.
Well, yeah, I will be. I think they would be highly disappointed because of all of the work that they did. And remember, when my grandparents came here at the turn of the century, when Richard's mother and our mother was working there, it was truly taking a risk. They didn't have all these programs or all of all these things.
Right.
That the white people did not want them doing what they were doing, and so they truly were courageous and took a lot of risks so that that future generations could have a better quality of life and have equity and equality and all of that. And I think they would be very, very disappointed.
That we've taken a step backwards.
Yes.
Wow. How about you, Mr. Billy?
She said it all.
Okay. Listen to baby sister.
Exactly.
Is that what you called her growing up? Was she your baby sister?
No,
she's my sister, not my baby sister.
Okay, all right, Mr. Billy. Okay, Mr. Billy. All right. Don't pull out that stopwatch on me.
Yes.
Dr. Harris, how would your parents feel about what?
Well, when my dad was, he was very quiet and laid back. The women were the strong people in the community, and my mother would always call your mother just to find out what do you think, and then she'd call your aunt Lucille Mill, yeah. And I would say my mother would she would be fighting mad. What bothers me today is when Betty's parents and my parents were in Madison fighting the fight, they really put their lives on the line. Because the police were against them, the city was against them, and there was a lot of issues that they dealt with. No support, no Urban League, no NAACP, no nothing. But they were a strong group, and I know
the community was strong.
For a black community, yes, they were very strong. And black people lived in 3 areas: South Madison. The first was the Mifflin Street area. Second was the Triangle, the Bush, and third was South Madison. Now, South Madison was considered country. We had outhouses, what have you. But my mother, she would be very disappointed because as many black people as we have in this city right now, a lot of black professional leaders, they had more cohesiveness and more unity in fighting the struggles then that we have here.
So they would be disappointed at the lack of cohesiveness.
One of the things I liked about your concept yesterday, and I also told you on Saturday, is that it's bringing a lot of things together so that blacks can fight things in a uniform fashion. Didn't have that. So, and my mother, every time there was a problem, first thing she would do is call Miss Miller, Miss Lucille Miller, or your mother, and just to kind of find out, you know. And the other thing too is, as I recall, there was a restaurant. Was it owned by your family or the Gothards? Or?
No, it was owned by Ernie's Hilltop Restaurant.
No, that's Chicken Shack.
Yeah.
That's where black people would gather to eat, because no other restaurant would serve us.
Right.
And that's where they had to go.
Not exactly. Anybody in any restaurant in the Bush would serve.
Well, they didn't have many restaurants in the Bush. Now, her family also had the first black restaurant in South Madison.
Where was that?
It was at the corner of Bram Street, and at that time it was Fisher Street. Now it's Bell Street.
It used to be Park Street, Old Park Street.
And there was the Old Park Street, yes.
So what's that?
Ernie's Hilltop Restaurant.
And where's
Our
that?
dad was a chef.
Is that like where?
Where Bram Hill
nothing
is.
there.
Yeah, you know where Bram Hill is, right
Hill.
there.
Yeah, because my
That's
mom
where it
managed
was.
that for years.
Yeah.
That was your family had a
That's where it
restaurant
was.
They
there.
had a restaurant right there.
What kind of food did they serve?
Good food.
They
Barbecue and
Well, they had breakfast in the morning. I know that.
yeah.
They had a good lunch and they had a nice dinner.
And my dad barbecued.
Yeah, he barbecued.
So what was that space like? I mean, think about this. I think we only have 2 black restaurants right now. I think it's McGee's and I think it's called the Anointed One. So you all could go in here. The owners were black. The cooks were black. Would white people come in there to eat?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We never shut the door for anybody.
Because Monday's green.
Yeah.
So they would come in.
Because that's the neighborhood people that stopped mostly. And there weren't very many. We just were in a poor neighborhood that ate at home rather than buying out.
And it's interesting that, you know, you're asking about white people. There was a white couple that used to come regularly, and they were the ones who gave us our first dog. It was a Weimaraner.
They really, did you all have white friends growing up?
And they were from Texas.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you all have white friends growing up?
Of course.
Oh, yeah. I had, well, go ahead. I had, when I was at Franklin, it was 90% white, so I had, you know, white friends. Central was a small school. Central was probably the smallest high school in the city at that time. At best, it had maybe 400 to 500 kids, maybe 100 per grade. There were black students there. I remember Italian students, Jewish students, and I thought we got along well.
So was Madison integrated before Brown versus Board of Education?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. So when it was federally mandated to integrate schools, your schools...
But we already went to
You already had...
the schools that were in our neighborhood.
Well,
So where'd you go to school, Miss Betty? You go to
Lapham.
I went to Lapham when we first moved to
Yeah, Lapham and Central.
And Central for high school.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let me see. Central was the most integrated.
Yes.
But West and East did have, and Edgewood did have one family or two, whatever. They were not discriminated upon. They could go whatever school they want to it. Just that Central took care of the people from the Bush area where we lived, near East Side and the South Side.
Gotcha. Now we had some famous, semi-famous athletes like Al Dockery and George Dockery. Did you go to school with them, Mr. Billy?
I was a little bit younger.
All right.
And Eddie Withers.
And Withers,
Eddie Withers.
yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
he played. He's in your book, Dr. Harris, right?
Yep, yep.
He played football at Central High School, and he got drafted, and he came back, and he got a scholarship and went to the University of Wisconsin, and he was the first black All-American from the University of Wisconsin. I don't know if they recognize him for that.
I don't hear that name.
Eddie Withers, and he graduated. He went to the Green Bay Packers, hurt his knee, and then he came back to Madison. And, I may have mentioned this, but the football coach offered him a job as an assistant to him. And so they hired him, put him on the payroll. When he went down, and they said, you have to fill out some papers, take him down to, I don't know where the Board of Education was back in those days, but he took him in, and the secretary to the superintendent said, wait a minute. So she went in and showed him the papers and everything, and the superintendent, I don't want to mention his name because there's a school named after him now, but he came out and he said, under no circumstances would I have a colored person working in my school teaching my students. So no.
So even though he played for the Green Bay Packers, he could not coach.
And Wisconsin, that was an All-American, and his football coach wanted him to be his assistant. He had to go to Milwaukee to coach football.
Wow. Were there parts of Madison you all weren't allowed to go to?
No. Never.
So you could go all across the community?
Yeah.
Never.
But there were no places. There were very few places that would sell the homes to black people.
But you could visit or go around those. Let me ask you, when you look at your relatives who might have grown up in Kentucky, in Georgia, were there distinct differences between your lifestyle, the lifestyle of your children? That could be education, job opportunities, compared to your relatives who might have been growing up in the South. Did you notice a difference or an advantage or a disadvantage of being in Madison?
Because I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Let me ask it again. So you all grew up in Madison and raised your children in Madison. But if you had relatives who were still in the South, was there a difference in how those children, your nieces and nephews, grew up as compared to how your children grew up in Madison? Was life better for your children than for your relatives who were raising children, say, in the South?
See, that's a question that I feel like I can't answer because
your family was here.
Most of our family was here.
So how about you, Dr. Harris? If you had family in Georgia, other places, or Chicago?
That's a very good question. My family, and I got a ton of relatives in Sumter County, and it's in Americus, Georgia, and they'll tell me, Richard, your family made a tremendous mistake by going to Wisconsin.
Really?
You just talk about the two-faced white people up there and the racism and discrimination. Now, they're not lynching up there, but we have black doctors down here. We have black attorneys. We have black school principals. You don't have any of that up there.
So your kids never see that.
And my kids
we didn't see that growing up.
No. So they felt that we made but see, they didn't have to worry about getting kicked out of the. But I want to say something about her father. I loved her father. His name was Ernest Mitchell. And there's two things I liked about him. He always thought that I was inquisitive because I asked him 1,000 different questions. And one day he told your brother Jack, he said, Richard Harris reminds me of a squirrel. And when we used to go hunting and you needed some bait to get something out there if you're shooting, you get a squirrel, and you he'd be the squirrel bait. He said, Richard reminds me of the squirrel bait. He's just all over. I asked him 1,000,000 questions, but he was the first black to graduate from Central High School.
Your dad was?
I'm finished.
Awesome.
And he played football. He was the first black to make all-city football here in Madison.
Yeah.
Ernest Mitchell, and I have a picture of him.
You sure do. I saw that.
Yeah, and he's from Central High School. I have a lot of stuff about her family because my mother and father.
We were like family.
She really thought, the world of him. And my dad just thought the world of, he would call him Mr. Mitchell. And but he was just a tremendous man. Oh, I love that man. And so Jack, her brother, would call me. I would be out there in the basketball and I would be shooting, and he'd say, "Make it squirrel bait." And those guys would say,
"Who is squirrel bait?"
Squirrel bait. And then Jack would explain it.
Yeah.
But I love that man. He was such a nice man. And that leads me to believe that we had a big difference in is that the black elders, they had a much tighter control over us as it related to how to do things right.
Mm-hmm. Give me an example.
Well, when I'm talking to my kids, when they were growing up, I'd have to look at them cross-eyed to get them. You say, take the garbage out, Charles, or take the garbage out, Vicky. You have to look at them cross-eyed before they finally, they're watching TV, and, when my mother said something, I did it right up, and then came back and said, my kids used to grumble. I never grumbled with my parents. If I did, I'd get knocked into the next county. And I look at my grandchildren, it's like talking to this wall here. Because they ask. So I just see a tremendous, difference.
Well, I think that one of the things that I believe is that back in the day, the 30s, 40s, 50s, there was a strong concentration on family. Mm-hmm. And because most of our social life was connected to the church, it was faith and family. And our parents and the generation, before us really concentrated on strengthening their families without social services, without any other outside resources. And I get really upset when I hear people talk about, and they were also fighting for justice.
Sure.
And when I hear people say that nothing was done before they got here, whoever these people are, because that wasn't true.
Right.
I can remember, people calling people to make sure they went to the NAACP meeting, to make sure if there was, as Richard said, there was an issue in the community, they would call each other and figure out how they needed to address that, whatever issue there was. But they had a very, very strong family ethic.
Sure.
And they really, and all of us felt like we were family, whether we lived on the east side or the south side.
You were family.
We were family.
That's where that play cousins concept comes in. That we make family quickly. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
ma'am.
that's okay.
Please keep going.
No, but I think that that's one of the things that, because if you start talking about families, and I think that that's one of the important aspects of Muriel's book, Sedlin.
Muriel
Sims.
All right.
Because her book is about family. She interviewed the descendants of early African American settlers here.
I've got to get her in my studio to be a part of this series.
Yeah. But that's one of the things that I always emphasize is the strong family ethic that was in the community at that time.
That's so powerful.
Yes.
You made me think about something, Miss Betty, when you're talking about people calling each other to go to the NAACP meetings. Do you remember your parents voting?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So
they never missed. I mean,
did they vote before the Voter Registration Act? Were black people allowed to vote?
Oh, yes.
In Madison, yeah. My family voted. All I remember.
How early?
I remember in the 40s. I can remember. So I was born in 1937, and I started remembering things when we had to go to outdoor toilets, which was about 4 or 5. That's when I started remembering things. That's my trigger.
Sure.
And I remember when my parents voted, they voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
Your folks too, Miss Betty?
Mm-hmm.
And my dad said, never vote Democratic, but always vote.
But your dad told you not to vote Democratic.
Not to vote Republican.
Okay.
Yeah.
He told me to vote Democrat.
They were strong Democrats.
And he always said, to vote. I just want to piggyback on one of the things that your mother told my mother. And she said, Willie Lou, you and your husband better start buying some property. Now, they had been living upstairs over a tavern, and she talked my mother And there was no property in your area. It was all built up. So they had to go out to South Madison. My family bought property in South Madison because it was cheap. I mean, it was not. It really was. It was very cheap.
So black people were voting and buying property.
Oh yeah.
And
in South Madison now.
In South Madison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were businesses.
Businesses.
In South.
We need to know this history.
That's what I'm. Can I just say this?
Yes, just go ahead.
That's what Stoney the Road, that has not been really publicly launched yet, is about. It's about the early history of African American settlers who came here and settled between 1900 and 1950.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, one of the things that I'm glad you mentioned this about your family being having the first black restaurant out there in South Madison. Curly Seals was the first black man he was an auto mechanic in his garage. He worked for a company called Pyramid Motors, but on Saturdays and Sundays and in the afternoon, he would repair. He was the only black person that could repair a car. A lot of these other companies wouldn't serve black people. We had 2 or 3 black restaurants, big restaurants, where you'd go and have fish, chicken, and my family felt comfortable going to Miller's because they knew they could get served and not be harassed or what have you. You couldn't do that at a white restaurant. The other thing is that you had James Taliaferro. He had a restaurant. I mean, he washed clothes. It was called Tally's Laundry. We had James Braxton and my brother Donald Harris. They had dry cleaning companies. You had my brother Calvin, who was a construction person. But now this was back in the 50s. But the business was good because there was only one.
Sure, and the black people went to them.
And you couldn't get white people wouldn't serve you. They didn't want you in restaurants. They made it clear they didn't want your business.
So we created our own business.
Yes.
Mr. Billy, you wanted to jump in and say something, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say that back in the 40s, I can remember my uncle Duke having his garage on East Main Street. And he stayed there for a number of years. And he used to handle a couple of trucking businesses here. And he also had, he and Virgil Wood had a Auto Bright laundry, washing cars.
I love hearing about this history.
And that was in the 40s, early 40s.
You got the black businesses?
And this is Stoney the Road timeline. Between 1930 and 1940, there were restaurants. Old Middleton Roadhouse. The original owner was Frank Hoover, who worked with Harry Allison Sr.
Mm-hmm.
Chicken Shack, owned by Kerry Williams and then later Kurt Lucas.
Right.
Broadway House, owned by the Mildred Green family.
Yes.
Tijuana Restaurant, owned by J. Scott Mosley, who probably had the first food cart.
Yep.
He sold hot tamales.
Wow.
Hilltop, Ernie's Hilltop Restaurant, owned by Ernest Mitchell, who was my father. Trotter's Billiards, owned by Zachary Trotter.
But what happened to these businesses? Where did they go, Miss Betty? Where did the businesses go?
Well, it was about maintaining them. And
have customers.
Because we started eating at white restaurants? We started going to Perkins and every place else and stopped eating at our own restaurants?
Well,
I mean, because did white people close them down or did we stop patronizing our own business?
We stopped patronizing them.
I'm sorry. I don't keep reading. No, keep reading those, Miss Betty.
Then George Green's Four Lakes Cleaners and George Green's Victory Cleaners. But that's the list that we have. That was between 1930 and 1940. Wow. And my Ernie's Hilltop Restaurant was in the 50s.
That was in the 50s.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/blacklikeme and help us take the show to another level. Who were your role models growing up outside of your family, Miss Betty?
I would say outside of my family, the women in my church, St. Paul AME Church.
Sure.
You know,
what are some of the names of some of those women?
Mrs. Mary Beulah Care.
Oh, Queensgrove. I grew up across the street from her.
Oh, yeah. She was my mother's best friend.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I saw a lot of her. But there were women in the missionary society, you know, who my mother would have them, you know, they would have their missionary meetings. Jewel Freeman. And I remember in the church, you know, we had a lot of respect for the women who wore the bonnet. In the AME church.
Sure.
But those, you know, those were women that, you know, what I saw, you know, was the way that you lived your life and you took care of your families.
Did your family help to start St. Paul AME Church?
Our grandfather was one of the founders of the St. Paul AME Church.
So you walk around Madison and drive around Madison and have all this beautiful history.
Oh, there's yes.
Did you ever have any black teachers?
No.
No black teachers? I've only had like 2 or 3.
My Aunt Ernestine was a substitute back in the 50s and early 60s.
Could you all go swimming in the lakes? Could y'all go to the beaches? I'm sorry, Mr. Billy. You saying something, sir?
Well, I was going to correct Betty on one other thing. If she forgot, doesn't have the list of Davis's chicken place on the highway, where is now the Beltline. And that, my mother, when between the death of my father and her remarriage, worked at that, and Grammy and I used to go out and sit on their porch, upper porch, and watch the landing over at the landing field. It was it's right where the Beltline is right now. Davis's chicken farm.
Do you all remember when the Beltline was put in?
Yeah.
Highway 12 and 18.
Yeah.
What, were those houses there, or was it just like a country road?
It was like a country road.
Country road.
There was a. Go ahead, Billy.
Japanese farmer.
Yeah. Toki. His
Toki.
name was Mr. Toki. Yeah.
Toki Road.
Oh, Toki Middle School is named after him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the airport was right near his place.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one at a bend. It was a bar restaurant. We didn't know what the name of it or anybody.
So where the West Beltline is right now, you said that was.
Well, you know.
What if that used to be? That was just country.
You know where the Fountain of Life Church is?
I go there every Sunday. I mess with Dr. Harris because he knows that's where I pastor. So right there, that's right on the edge. That's right on the Beltline.
I used to, detassel corn. So I worked for a company along with a lot of other young black kids.
Was it Blaney Farms?
Blaney's. You remember the Blaney
I tried
Farms?
to get a job at Blaney's Farm when I was a kid. They didn't hire me.
Well, they hired me.
They
I was just
They didn't like you.
I was just barely able to stand up to detassel the corn.
But that corn came all the way up to where the Beltline is?
Yeah, right. In fact, when I was at your church, I was thinking, have we come a long way? Because I used to detassel corn right here.
There.
And now I told him that they're going to have this extremely good program in their building, and it'll become the gateway to South Madison. And I remember growing up in South Madison, there was a Burroughs bowling, a golf course.
Sure.
Driving.
Golf course.
And the street was Park Street was a one-way street, running into Oregon. But just wanted to say, and I was thinking about it, when we fought the public schools when they were closing down Lincoln, there were 2 businessmen on the Board of Education. And Kwame Salter said, Richard, we got a problem here because once they close Lincoln, the whole community is just going to dissipate. And it's going to be just like the Triangle. And these businesses are going to come in.
And Triangle, when they move the black people out.
And so they're going to move all the South Madison people out. So where you were talking, that would have been these little Villager Mall trendy shops, because they wanted that to be the gateway to Madison. There's only 2 gateways. One is the east side, East Washington, and this one. And so the city of Madison, they're disappointed now because they're not. These guys are still around. They're probably in their 80s and 90s, but they want that area. That would have been a tremendous business opportunity after they kicked off, everybody. But so it can't go now, obviously.
It still is. It's just going to help our community now.
Yeah, right. So I just thought about that. One more thing about her mother, Miss May Mitchell, in that she was the kind of person, and we don't have that from anyone black or white today. When she never laughed and grinned in your face. If you were a redneck, racist, and discriminating, she would tell you to your face. She had no qualms about saying that. That's why she was a true leader. She was an indigenous leader, and people I know because when my mother and dad came here, and my dad came in 1910, and we didn't purchase any property till 1917. My uncle Zach Trotter, who had the tavern, he said, "Willie Lou, you gotta call Mrs. Mitchell. She knows everything. Don't call Mr. So and so." So she,
wow,
she was, and my mother, she never forgot that. And with with her aunt, and so her mother is like a forgotten heroine.
Well, we can't let that happen.
We don't have a school named after her. I'm thinking where Kaleem Kerr's school is. She saved all, because like Reverend Washington said, if we don't get this daycare center here, I don't know where these black kids are going to go.
Wow,
because black kids, they wouldn't let them go to these other daycare centers.
That's so amazing. So let me do this. Let me turn to Miss Betty because I want you to have some of the last words on some of this. I grew up with your daughter, Carla. Carla's a year younger. She was a track star.
Yeah.
But a lot of our African American children who are born here choosing not to come back to Madison because they're finding just stuff that's better. But we started seeing that really early, like with Carla, like people in that age. I graduated from high school in 81, Carla in 82. Many of us went away for college. I didn't. I stayed here and went to school at the University of Wisconsin. But we're continuing to see that trend, aren't we, of our African-American children choosing not to stay, many of them choosing not to stay in Madison. Exactly.
And I think a lot of it has to do with feeling, Carla came back here when her kids were younger.
Okay.
And she said to me one day, we were at a restaurant eating, and she said, "I haven't seen one black person." She had been living in Atlanta. And I think it is being surrounded by your own culture,
sure,
your own history, being acknowledged as an important part of the community, your neighborhood, and that's missing here.
Yes, it is.
When you think about, I remember when my son was in kindergarten and me saying to his teacher, "Snowmen are nice, but what I want to see pictures that say to Alan, this is who you can be."
Sure.
So we still have a lot of work to do. I think when Richard talks about my mother, she got that from her mother and father, who came here, who were followers of W.E.B. Du Bois. He was their friend. He came to their house.
Your grandparents?
Yes.
Get out of here.
Yes, he came to their house and
Please don't tell me you got
strategized.
photos of them together. Please don't tell me you got photos of
Well,
them.
we haven't been able to find any, but
But I didn't mean to cut you
on
off. But
research.
your grandparents
Yes,
were
they were friends to W.E.B. Du Bois, and my grandfather was a part of the Talented Ted, the Niagara movement.
Your grandfather was?
Yes.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
And so that is where all of
I mean, that's where all social civil rights things
Yes.
were framed. For
Right.
folks that are
Yes.
listening, Google the Niagara
Yeah.
movement. But all of the major movements came out of that
yeah,
meeting.
and he was ill, so he didn't go to that meeting that they had.
He was a missing person.
Yeah, so
Niagara 11.
so that's where all of that came from. That my mother grew up in that environment. I grew up in that environment. You know, I knew my history.
Sure.
You know, there may not have been. You know, there wasn't anything at Lapham School that said anything to me, but our weekends were full of the legacy
History.
and history, and our church. The church, there were 3 black churches in Madison when we were all growing up. The church was our touchstone.
Yeah.
Tell me what those 3 churches were.
St. Paul AME Church, Mount
Zion.
Zion
Mount
Baptist
Zion
Church,
Baptist
and Second
and
Baptist.
Second Baptist. I love what you're saying about. So first of all, I just have to pick my teeth up. Your grandparents were colleagues with W.E. Du Bois. And so, man, the conversations they must have had. So your grandfather coming here, being a part of the Talented 10th, having a law degree from Berea College, and couldn't practice law here. And we're 100 years later, we're trying to find black lawyers. Where are the black attorneys we want to come here? We had them and wouldn't let them practice.
And the other thing that in 1905 or 1909, my grandparents started the Negro Book Lovers Club, and those notes are in the Historical Society. I have taken those notes, and they will be a part of Stoney the Road. Muriel had got permission to put them in her book. You read those notes, you get a really great sense of who those very early settlers were. It is rich with history. I mean, they came together and talked about culture and arts and politics. And because I was reading through them, they had a short discussion about Jack Johnson in these notes.
Sure.
Rich with history.
In 1909, 1910.
Yes.
If you were, I want to talk. So let me ask you this: if you were mayor today of Madison, Wisconsin, what would your message be to white leaders, and what would your message be to black leaders? Is that a hard question?
Well, I think it's a.
Should I just ask you what would you do if you were mayor? What are some things you would do to change this mess?
Well, I think it's far too complicated for me to answer.
Okay.
I think that the lack of equity and racism is so steeped in our institutions that they all need to be torn down and started all over again.
I'm with you.
You know, so it's
like a
too
condemned building. If you can't fix it, you do have to start all over at some point.
And it's a too complicated a question. I would rather talk to black leaders than to white leaders. You know, if I had my way, the black leaders of this community would be talking about what it is that we need to do for our black community.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. That is powerful. Well, listen, you all, this has been very inspiring to me. I'm drawing from the richness of your heritage and your experience during Black History Month, to be quite honest. With all due respect to Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, I love doing that. But my team is in that room. They're listening. This coming February, I want Nehemiah and our Justified Anger Initiative to make sure that we proliferate the heritage of the black descendants of history makers like your parents and your grandparents, because we can keep talking about people who lived 150 years ago, but let's talk about people who walk the same streets we walk in, who went to the same schools we went to, swam in the same waters we swam in. We need to know this. My daughter needs to know this. My family needs to know this. My church needs to know this. And I'm taking that upon myself as a charge to do a better job of lifting this up.
Yeah, and Stoney the Road is full of that history. Richard is a part of it. Billy's a part of it. We have a work group that's working on it.
Well, let's highlight that in February.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to do some live event. I did a live event for my podcast. Maybe I get you all to do it and have a big event.
I want to take a stab at that question. Do I have a minute to take a stab at the one that
Sure.
Well, you're talking about her rich heritage. That's the reason my mother and father were told to contact her
because of that richness.
Because they said she knows everything. And everything that her mother told my mother and father to do, they did. She said, go out and buy some property, get out of that area, So I'm glad they listened to her. But one of the things that bothers me about the city, I'm going to talk about two things. My kids used to ask me, Dad, what was it like in Madison? And I tried to explain to them. I wasn't getting anywhere. That's why I wrote my book. It's my legacy. Read this thing, and I passed it on to all my nephews. I got 100 of them, thousands, not 1,000. I got quite a few out there in South Madison. So I always give them. I said, read it. But you asked the question about what should the mayor do.
Well, no, I was asking if she were mayor, what would she do?
Okay, if she was a mayor.
Yeah, I want to just know her perspective. Okay. So not really anything on the mayor.
If I were the mayor.
Okay, if you were mayor.
If I were the mayor, racism is an economic thing. The thing that really stopped blacks in Madison was what we call economic disenfranchisement. Everything
that's a subtitle of your book.
That's a subtitle of the book, because whites made sure that blacks could not break out of that economic, stronghold that they had. So if I were the mayor, I would say I'm going to start from an economic standpoint a situation where blacks can become gainfully employed and as their white counterparts. For example, of the top 150 companies in Madison, Wisconsin, going from the largest insurance companies, the largest utilities on down, you probably have 3 black CEOs out of 150.
If that many.
Well, I know one or two.
Okay.
You probably have 3.
No.
And after that, very few blacks are being employed as managers, supervisors in these institutions, these companies. And then you'll say, white people will throw up their hands and say, what are we to do? Well, what you should do is give black people a chance to have an equal share of the economic pie. I'm not in favor. I don't talk about reparations so much because I don't understand that part of it, but I do know that there's economic unfairness. And to me, that's the true racism. Black men and black women are not being given a chance to become gainfully employed in these number of these positions. You talk about the number of black graduates who graduate on June 7th, Saturday, and on June 9th, they're flying out of here. They're not going to be employed in these areas. There's racism and discrimination is so steeped in this employment economic thing. So they'll talk a good game. Now, they may do something for white women. They may do something, but they have a connection that they can. We don't have that. And so if I were a mayor, I would send out a letter to the top 150 companies and say, look, I'd like you to start an affirmative action plan. Whereas I'd like you to list the number of blacks that you have as CEOs, supervisors, managers, the number of blacks that you have on your board of directors, and let me know how many blacks you have in these high-paying positions that blacks are qualified to become, but they're not employed. And then you're going to say, why don't black people work here in Madison, these students? Because they see the racism and discrimination. They don't see any black managers at the banks.
So as mayor, you would make sure that they would change
fill out
that.
they'd fill out that. Now it would be voluntarily because you can't make them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the year, you'd give them an award, for something, or a plaque or something, saying thank you. But at least they would deal with the economic aspect.
I like that. So Miss Betty, you have the last word.
Well,
anything we haven't touched upon that you want to say, ma'am, about the importance of Black history in Madison?
Well, I think that
Black history makers in Madison.
I think that there needs to be some respect given and honor given to those early history makers for whatever they were doing.
Sure.
If they were quietly raising their families and giving them the kinds of values that would make contributions to this city, or if they were on the line, taking the risks so that there would be change. I think my biggest disappointment is that there is not that understanding, and that is why we created Stoney the Road, because the road was stony.
Sure was.
Mm-hmm.
And those early African-American settlers who came here between 1900 and 1950, they are the ones that paved the way for, I just read where the new band director for UW Band, and there are, the university will, do hire people come here, but the road was paved with the blood, sweat, and tears of those early African-American settlers. And we need to pay homage to them and give respect to that history.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. When that book comes out, you said it's coming out soon?
Well, it's a project.
When it's finished,
presentations.
I would love to talk with you all, but I'm giving you my word. I want to do something in February where we highlight that work in these historians. You all, I consider all day. I appreciate my elders, and Miss Betty, I appreciate you and what you do, and we haven't even got into your work with young children and healthy babies, but I appreciate your efforts so much. Dr. Harris, appreciate your efforts and your wisdom.
Thank you.
Mr. Billy, thank you for clicking that watch on me, give me a couple of good times. I think I could have gotten a faster quarter. I think you were a little slow on that watch a couple of times, Mr. Billy, but we're gonna let that slide because it's been like 40 years. We're gonna let that slide. And I'm teasing Mr. Billy. He's looking at me like he gonna cut me when I get outside. Okay, so you all, thank you. This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. And I have been sitting in the studio with not only Black history makers, but the descendants of Black history makers. This has really been my honor. Thank you all for listening in today. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, Black Like Me. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation. Ooh, Black Like Me.